Kwon is the author of the nationally best-selling novel The Incendiaries, which was named Best Book of the Year by more than 40 publications and was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle John Leonard Award. With Garth Greenwell, Kwon co-edited the best-selling Kink, a New York Times notable book. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, and elsewhere. She has received fellowships and awards from the National Endowment for the Arts, Yaddo, and MacDowell. She most recently came out with her novel, Exhibit. Born in Seoul, Kwon has lived most of her life in the United States. Please join me in welcoming our own Kwon. Lisa Ko is the nationally best-selling author of the novels Memory Peace and The Leavers, which was a finalist for the National Book Award for Fiction and the PEN Hemingway Award, and winner of the 2016 PEN Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction. Ko's short fiction has appeared in the Best American Short Stories series, and her essays and nonfiction have been published in the New York Times and The Believer. Please join me in welcoming Lisa Ko. Okay, so to start us off with a question that I think touches on both of your books, both of your books deal with themes of, I would say, radical women. In Lisa's book, we of course have the tech visionary, the enduring activist, and the unrepentant artist. And in Reese's book, we also have an unrepentant female artist who explores her sexuality through kink with another woman, and perhaps even more radically, through opting not to have children. And so I'm very curious to hear you both speak a little bit about the particular challenges and opportunities of characterizing women who go against the grain of mainstream society. Maybe we'll start with Reese.
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer, and hi everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you to the Texas Book Festival. I was asked here 6 years ago with my first book, and it's so good to be back. So you know, one of the originating questions that sparked Exhibit for me was I just became fascinated by all the ways in which I realized at some point that I feel strongly encouraged by the world to want certain things, and just as encouraged to not want other things. And I feel strongly pushed by the world, by the zeitgeist, to want to be a mother of, a sister of, a daughter of, a friend of, a community member of. It's all mediated through that preposition, that of. And I feel just as pushed to not want to be, or to hide, or if possible kill my desire to pretty much anything for myself. So you know, absolutely anything that has to do with my body. So sex, food, ambition for sure, artistic ambition. Even a day to myself often feels like something, if I just want a day to myself for absolutely no reason except that I want it, it feels like something that kind of has to be defended. And I became just fascinated by that dichotomy. And I love my friends. It's really important to me to be very involved in my communities. But what is so dangerous, what is so wayward about me ever wanting for myself? And that was kind of what started off this book, I think. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I have a follow-up question for you. But I'd love to hear. Yeah,
sure. Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks everyone for being here. So like you mentioned, the book Memory Peace is around these three lifelong friends who come in and out of each other's lives over the course of 60 years. And I think they're all just really deeply ambitious, honestly. And they meet sort of and bond as outsiders, even within the sort of insular immigrant community that they're all from. And they're all sort of looking to find a way to pursue like their creative visions, whether it's in art or early tech or in activism, and sort of pushing against the very gendered expectations that are put on them. And one of the, seeds of the book was really trying to think about the challenges of making art under capitalism. I started writing this book right after I sold my first book, and of course this question is something that I'm still struggling with. I think we're always trying to figure out how to buy time to make the work we need to do, but then we need the time to make money to buy time. So it's that sort of persistent conundrum that ends up impacting who gets to make art, what informs that art, what that art is about, but also we figure out these really creative ways around it as well. So I wanted to kind of push back against, this art monster narrative, which is mostly about a man, mostly straight, mostly white, who's like pursuing his art or his work at expense of his relationships. And I think for the three women in Memory Piece, they're kind of all art monsters in their own way, where they're ambitious and obsessed with their work, but they're also, I think, trying to integrate it more where their relationships are also influencing their art and their work. And it's also a deeply queer book, so it's very much about that role of chosen family and the importance of that for collective survival.
Thank you. And just had to take that moment to formulate my follow-up question for you, Reese. And of course, that, as always, without wanting to give away anything or spoil anything, but I just loved how you were talking about that idea of that preposition, like daughter of, community member of, et cetera, and the tension between that and the sort of self-centered or sort of self-oriented self. And I just would love to hear you in whatever way you feel like you can talk about it without giving too much of the book away, about how you see the narrator sort of struggle with and against her religious and her spiritual faith as being a part of that of question that you were just bringing up.
Yeah, that's such a great question. Well, so I grew up really religious. I grew up so religious that the shorthand. Well, first I was really Catholic, and then I turned really Protestant. And the shorthand that I used to give is that I used to say that I was so religious I wanted to be a pastor until I lost my faith when I was 17. But it wasn't that chill. I wanted to be a saint. I wanted to be an isolated mystic in a cave. I wanted to commune with the Lord. I wanted to just live in the desert on locusts and honey. I wanted to see the face of God and live and walk through fire. I'm not a chill person overall. I've never been accused of being easygoing, and so yeah. But then I lost the faith, and so that career path became unavailable to me. And then so and I think I'm always it's still the central loss of my life, the loss of that faith, and I'm always writing about it. I think in some ways continuing to write about faith and about that tremendous loss is a last way of being with this God who has proven to be unavailable to me. And so yeah, I think I've gotten this sense lately that maybe because of this book I wrote, Exhibit, which it has a lot to do with desire, including sexual desire, including queer and kinky desire. I think because of this book and because I co-edited a book titled Kink that brings together short stories by a lot of people, by 12 people, that have to do with sexual kinks. I've gotten the sense that people think I'm really free, that I'm really liberated. But once again, I grew up really ex-Catholic, really ex-Protestant. I'm a Korean immigrant woman. I'm not I walk around under what seems to be a triple heap of shame around everything that has to do with my body. And I think what I've started understanding, I think what my character, my narrator, Jin, who's a photographer, in which she slowly understands as well, as she begins to explore more of her sexuality, is you don't have to be liberated to try to do liberating things. Mm-hmm. You don't have to feel free to try to do freeing things. You can act as though. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the tension that the book is really interested in.
That's interesting. That's almost like what one character says about ritual and not just needing to do the ritual first, right?
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, Lisa, I wanted to ask you, as Lisa mentioned, her book's set in New York over this span that spans, the misty past to the misty future. And one thing that's so striking about the book for anyone who reads it is that these sections set in New York that are set in the past, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, have simply just the force and precision of memory. They just feel so deeply remembered in the way that, also in the way that the details are just having written myself a book set in New York in the past, where all the details had to be laboriously researched. You just kind of come up against the same thing again and again. And this stuff is not like that. It's so very, very vivid and specific and idiosyncratic. And you think, oh my gosh, what amazing feat of research. But then it goes into the future and all of the details also feel remembered. So I wanted to ask you about that, not just about, of course, the research of the past, which is impressive, but also then how you sort of project that research into this imagined future and make it feel just as remembered somehow.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that comment. I mean, I started writing the book in some ways as a coming-of-age story, and part of it was also in response to being a little burned out in researching my first book, where I had to travel to Asia and like navigate different languages and like, you know, go and learn something that I was deeply unfamiliar with. And for this book, I was like, well, why not just write about a city that you know very, very well because you've lived there your whole life, and it's not hard to sort of remember the things that you've experienced in the neighborhoods that you've lived in. So, you know, that sort of grew into, I think anytime you're writing about the past, you start thinking about like, what's changed since then, right? What's changed since the 90s and what might continue to change in the future. So the friendship stories sort of intertwine in the worlds of art and tech and gentrification. And I realized that what I wanted the book to do was sort of mimic that experience of moving through time. So there's this sort of pleasure of nostalgia, you know, kind of slowly remembering and experiencing this kind of mundane suburban childhood to the rush of this like, you know, almost absurd Y2K tech optimism that I also lived through. And just kind of imagining what might continue if these things continue apace around tech and surveillance and gentrification. And, you know, I think to like paraphrase Samuel Delany, when we're looking at speculative fiction or science fiction, it's much less about the future than about the present, right? It's sort of a way to be in dialogue around the present, a way to present possibilities for the present. And, you know, the present moment, some of you might agree, is a little anxiety producing for a lot of reasons. And, you know, memory is, again, like a huge part of the book as well, you know. And we're sort of in this moment of like, you know, epistemological warfare where there's a battle for like truth and memory. You know, there's a lot of ways that our understanding of the past is trying to be controlled to influence the future, whether it's literally through censoring history or, you know, wiping down social media websites. So I really wanted the book to explore that experience of both remembering and forgetting, and then ultimately, you know, trying to be optimistic and remembering the importance of memory in order to survive in the future.
I don't know if this is a comment you get a lot, probably it is, but I think one of the things that was so haunting to me about those future sections was just like the continued presence of the pop songs of the past.
Right.
There was something about that was
they never go away.
Like it felt so real that of course like this is one thing people would still have, but something about that of like listening to
I know,
like Madonna
haunting,
in this, it was so chilling and great, and I loved it so much. I'd love to hear you both talk a little bit about the process of structuring your books. So Lisa's book is sort of a triptych following these three women across three timelines, and also includes photographs and inventory lists and things of this sort. Reese's book is sort of a singular point of view with interjections from possibly, I guess, the ghost of a Korean courtesan who speaks in a very different voice from Jin, but sort of primarily linear. And whenever I read your writing, Reese, I've always wanted to ask you this. Like, I always have the feeling that I'm reading like this perfect tip of an iceberg that must have been so much bigger once. Like it's compressed into this thing that feels like this perfect little diamond of economy and compression and force. I have no idea if that's how you write them, if you write a lot and then, but anyway, I would love to hear from both of you just about the process of structuring these books, how you arranged them as you did, anything you jettisoned along the way. Maybe I'll start with Lisa, since I start with you first.
Yeah, this book started out mainly with two characters, with Jackie and Giselle in girlhood, as both these sort of artistic collaborators and, you know, childhood weirdos doing weird art together and sort of having that tension in their friendship. And I feel like for me, you know, the process of novel writing is always about me trying to figure out, like, not only the questions I'm asking through the writing, but it's also reflecting what I'm responding to in the world around me, and like also ends up sort of shaping my own life in a way, So that's maybe how I justify spending 78 years on my books each, and like choosing this particular way of life. But somewhere like around year 2, I realized that the book actually had 3 protagonists and not 2, and that was sort of, the like aha, oh shit moment, which is like, oh great, I figured out sort of the missing piece to the book, but oh shit, now I have to go and rewrite the whole thing. So, it was very clarifying. And then I realized Ellen was sort of just this nosy neighbor kind of friend character that kept horning in on both the main character's narratives, and that she kind of wanted her own say. So I ended up restructuring it, and that ended up being the missing part to like kind of tying the past, present, and future together.
Thank you so much for saying that, Jennifer. I just want to say, so Jennifer and I were in a writing group together in the early 2010s, I want to say, and I've loved and admired her work for so long, and Lisa and I, our first books came out in 2018, and so we started getting to know each other back then, and so it's just really special to like be here with 2 writers whose work I love so much, and I've loved for so long. But this book, it went through something like, I actually have no idea, it's somewhere between 40 and 70 drafts, which is a vast improvement on my first book, The Incendiaries, which was somewhere between 50 and 100. I don't know how many, and I don't want to know because I don't know. I don't know if this metaphor is right because I don't have kids. But my friends with kids say it's okay and to keep using it. So, but it feels like what some people say about giving birth, that your body forgets, so you can have the energy to do it all over again. But for me, I not throw away, but I go through so much, so many drafts. A year before the last edits on this book, the book was twice as long as it was, and one day suddenly I was going through it and I was like, wait, there's so much that's repetition that I don't need. And I'm really obsessed with language on the level of the syllable, the punctuation mark. So much so that, for instance, with my first book, there was a round of edits with my wonderful editor where she very reasonably asked me to make a comment every time I didn't take one of her suggested edits, and this was an entire round that largely had to do with punctuation. And at the end of my first book's quite short. Both books are quite short. It's about, say, 42,000 words, so it comes out to about 200 book pages. The first book, I had over 1,000 comments in that manuscript, which were all the times I refused to take that when she'd suggest that like a semicolon be a period. And at some point, it got so bad that the Apple wheel of death would spin every time I tried to save the document. And I was terrified that I was going to piss people off, and I was asking friends what on earth I was supposed to do, and one friend said, just pick which hills you're willing to die on. And I thought about it, and I was like, I'll die on every hill. Why would I go to all the trouble of making a hill if I'm not ready to die for it? And it just seems to me that if a punctuation mark is off, then the sentence is off, and if the sentence is off, then the whole page is off, and then the whole book is. You might as well just throw it all away and start over. So to me, when I'm writing, it feels less as though I'm inventing and more as though I'm excavating and working my way toward a book that almost pre-exists me, which doesn't quite sound right. However, I came across it. I read somewhere that the ancient Greeks used to believe that image pre-exists its incarnation in the world, which I love very much. And at the very least, it feels better to feel as though I'm working towards something, because then it means that there is an ending at some point.
That was amazing. I love that so much. Yeah, I so completely feel that sense of it being chiseled. I mean, one of the things I just love about Lisa's writing so much is that maybe it's a little inside baseball, I guess, but there's like a way in which, like, I feel like you so trust the readers to catch up. It's like sometimes there'll be like a beat where I'm a little like disoriented, but then I'm like oriented in the most satisfying way, and I'm like, oh, like it's because she cut out like the 2 sentences that would have like held my hand through like getting, and I don't know, it's just the best, like most delicious feeling, and I love it so much in reading. And I also can really, it's like some of the way you're talking about writing, I can really hear like narratives of the saints from like varieties of religious experience, like this kind of intensity. Love it. Okay, I want to ask you guys both, and then I think maybe in about 3 minutes, if we have somebody, we'll have someone start to come through with your questions, so be continuing to percolate. So I want to ask you both, each of these books feel politically alert to me in somewhat different ways. Of course, in Memory Peace, we have this imagined, near future dystopia, and a lot of thinking, particularly from the activist character, although from the others as well, but particularly from the activist character, Ellen, about sustainability, resistance, when to comply, when to give up, when to keep trying, and what all of that means. And an exhibit, of course, one of the through lines is the narrator's concern that indulging in her particular sadomasochistic kink that's been important to her is in some ways, or has in some ways, troubling political implications, as though it reifies or confirms certain stereotypes about Asian American or Asian women as inherently submissive. And so I was curious if you could each talk a little bit about how politics or political thinking has inflected your writing, if that's even something that you're thinking about at all consciously as you write, or if it's more just like theme arising organically from character. I don't know. But yeah, either of you who wants to take that first.
I think for me, like, the three characters sort of function as part of the same whole. So the activist character, Ellen, she can be kind of annoying, and she's, sort of a moral mirror for the other two characters, where they're constantly kind of imagining or projecting what she might think of, her own disapproval, kind of even deciding to do or not to do things based on what they imagine Ellen would think. And I think for me, like, all those characters sort of reflect this kind of push-pull of, like, just living here and living under capitalism, living over the past 40 years in the US, and trying to, kind of figure out the balance between, questions of what it means to, like, live according to her values, and then, wanting a certain kind of security or safety, and trying to, like, straddle that line about what it means to be political versus, what it means to be successful. And so I think the way that the characters' friendships play throughout in the book, and the structure of the book as a whole, sort of represent that push and pull, I think. And, of course, I think it is, deeply political in its own way, and all my work is.
Yeah, I loved that. I felt I related deeply to the part of Ellen's section where she's just working all the time, and everybody's working all the time, and there's no space to do their activist work because they're just trying to survive. Yeah. And Reese, I'd love to hear your take on that question.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful question. So Korean women aren't supposed to give any indication in public that we've ever thought about sex, let alone wanted sex. It's Korean children have all been conceived immaculately, as far as anyone knows. So writing this book came with so much anxiety and fear and panic attacks. I very often had panic attacks that would last for hours. And when I asked Dr. Google what was going on, Dr. Google said that's not possible because panic attacks are only supposed to last for about 15 minutes. For anyone who hasn't experienced them or doesn't know people who has them, your body just gets convinced that you're dying and then proceeds accordingly. But when I went to talk to a real doctor, the doctor said I was having rolling panic attacks, and so the panic attacks were one was leading to the next, was leading to the next. And I'll admit that I felt a weird pride. I was just like, wow, I'm so tough. I have outlier panic attacks. My body can withstand what science says I shouldn't be able to. Anyway, but it wasn't like the most fun.
God.
And part of the terror, I think, it definitely was. There were a number of reasons for the fear, but part of the fear was that I was afraid that in writing this book, I'd be confirming some of the most available stereotypes about people who look like me, which is that we are, that we're submissive, that we're docile, that we're up for being mistreated. It's there with the first existence of East Asian women in the U.S. with the Page Act in 1875, which excluded Chinese women from being allowed into the country on the pretext that we were immoral. And so I just became increasingly afraid of writing this book that could be misinterpreted as confirming these stereotypes. And but then I also felt that I every juncture when I felt that I could write what I was more afraid of writing, or I could go in a direction where I was less afraid, I tried to walk toward the fear, and I increasingly found and believed that fear can be a real guiding sign for what I want to write. And like Toni Morrison has talked about this, Lucille Clifton. I have like a whole page of backup of people saying like, hell yeah, fear, like of artists saying that they found the fear to be useful. I thought, I just don't think our bodies are wrong. So many people walk around, and I certainly have and do, feeling that our bodies are wrong for existing as we do. And I don't think our bodies are wrong. I don't think we're wrong. And I wanted to write a book in which the characters can walk toward more freedom than I was feeling at the time.
Wow, you're a badass. Real badass. Maybe I don't know how many questions we've gotten so far, but I see Dolly in the back. I'll ask one more, and then maybe I'll try to bat signal with you and see what you think about how we're doing on audience questions. But so, okay. Okay, that's fine. I've got several more, so I can keep going. But I just don't want to exclude anybody else. So each of your books, in different ways, either is or contains narratives which reference other narratives. So obviously, in Memory Peace, we have the sort of ongoing references to and recurrence of characters and events that we've encountered in different sections between these three friends. And then in Exhibit, which is set in the broader Edwards College, extended universe for folks who've maybe read The Incendiaries, and we have reference to characters like Phoebe from the Incendiaries, and I was curious about that because I sort of noticed early on in the book that there was some name that I was like, oh, that's Julian. Yeah, I remember that. Like, that's got to be somebody from that first book. And then it comes a little bit more prominently. But I was just curious about the process of, maybe particularly for Reese, but for Lisa as well, of weaving these characters and references in a way that enriches and complexifies the moment or the narrative or the book that we're in right now without necessarily requiring the reader to have like absolutely perfect recall or maybe even knowledge of the other narrative threads. Does that make sense? Yeah. We're getting to the bottom of the questions, so I'm not going to promise the quality is A+. But do you have anything that you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, it's sort of like a fun narrative trick where you get to show the reader what the characters think about one another. And withhold that information from the characters themselves, right? So it's sort of the advantage of like having these multiple POVs, and you get to, you see like Jackie and Giselle sort of project all this stuff onto Ellen, and then when you reach Ellen's section, you're like, actually, she's just vulnerable and insecure like the rest of them. Like they're all sort of, informing one another as well. I guess in terms of the nitty gritty, I just get really obsessive with like index cards and post-it notes and Scrivener and like all these ways of kind of plotting out exactly what happens in time and situating certain scenes to arrive at certain moments, and then making sure I reference them in the previous section without like saying too much, right? So it's sort of walking that fine line between revealing information to the reader at the best and most strategic time.
Yeah, that dramatic irony. I think that's one of my favorite things that novels can do. There's just that one line, I guess, in Ellen's section where she references a sexual encounter she had at a movie theater, and you remember it from another character's POV, and I'm sure there's a lot of things like that I missed, but that one I caught, and I was like, oh, I love that. Like, it's like, not that I needed to like that section, but the layering was just so satisfying.
Yeah, it's fun as a writer to like do that kind of
like. It's fun as a reader to like find it and be like, I'm so smart.
Right.
When I'm extra sad about the state of the world, I really like to read physics for lay people, quantum, articles about quantum physics for people who, like me, who are not very good at science. But I think I love it because in quantum physics, they're always talking about just how like time isn't real, time is a fiction. We in a black hole, if we could exist in one, you can walk in and find just like endless versions of yourself, including alternate universe versions, et cetera, et cetera. I find all this very relaxing when the world is when the news is horrifying to imagine that there are other alternatives and anyway time isn't real, et cetera. Anyway, so if in a world in which, so in my first novel, there are there are 5 abortion clinics that are blown up by a far right Christian cult, and I thought, if in a world where that happens, that would loom rather large in American memory. Therefore, we're now in a slightly different universe than the one that we share right now. And so, and then I found that the second novel wanted to exist in that same world. And then I believe I'm working toward what should be either, if I live long enough, a trilogy or a quartet of related books that are very, very lightly related and can be read separately, but have links and have overlapping motifs and obsessions, like desire and faith and stuff. Yeah.
Would you ever write? Do you think you'll ever write from the perspective of a current believer?
Oh, that's such a beautiful question. I would love to, but I don't know. I currently, the current novel that I've been working on now for a year, which has to do, at least for now, with art heists, is definitely not from a believer's point of view. But everything changes so much in the books that a recurring joke in my household is my partner will come home and I'll say, he'll ask how's your day, and I'll say, it was amazing. I had this vast revelation. It's going to fix everything with what I'm working on. And he'll just say, did you change point of view again from third person to first person? And I'm like, yeah, I did. Okay, it was the 30th time, but it was fabulous. Anyway, so anything can change, anything can happen.
I love that. My husband we've also been long married, has a certain sound he makes when he's like wrestling through like a drawer and he's not going to find the thing. And I can if I hear it, I'm like, I can tell that you're like looking for something you're never going to find. It's like, these are the intimacies of like. Okay, we've got a couple questions here. This one's for you, and it asks if it's too personal, so I'm going to let you read that to yourself while I read you this one, and you can decide. Okay, so this one says, sorry, the writing's a little small. Okay, it says, what do you think it means to be an Asian American woman in this age, especially after social upheaval after the Black Lives Matter movement and the COVID pandemic? In other words, what does it mean for us sociopolitically? I asked that question as an Asian American woman myself, born and raised in Texas, and exploring the essence of who I am outside. I'm so sorry, outside of that triple shame that our Kwon said. And even now, I still am constantly constructing and reinventing myself. Good question. That's a big question.
That's a big question. I gotta think about it. Do you want to go?
I personally find the label Asian American and the category Asian American to be a politically useful term and not one that is all that useful otherwise. Asia comprises half the globe, and so that's just a lot of people, and I don't know. There's such a vast array of experiences, and almost, and this isn't even. I'm joking, but almost all that unites us is that maybe a lot of us really like race. And I'm not really sure what else there is, but I do find it to be a politically useful term, and I've been frustrated with. I think we still don't have it. The polling data from the elections. We still don't have a breakdown of Asian American voting, let alone how different Asians voted, and we're always clumped under other. And so there's value politically, and that's how the term started being used as well. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think of it a lot as like a leaky container. And in some ways, the book Memory Piece also kind of traces that, obliquely over the span of my lifetime. And I think about that a lot, just like how politically that category has changed, the failures of it, the strategies and advantages of it, and kind of, as you mentioned, just its inability to really hold, but also the importance of kind of positioning ourselves politically in certain ways, especially in terms of solidarity with other people, especially in this moment, feels important going forward.
Great. And then the same questioner had a second question, which I think Reese talked about a little bit in terms of fiction specifically and in writing exhibit, but maybe you guys have more broad responses too. The question is, do you feel that you often engage in self-policing and surveillance in order to contend with Asian stereotypes? How do you respond to it and continuously repurpose it in your writing? So you talked about writing towards the fear, but is there anything else that you guys want to comment on in regards to that question?
I mean, I thought about how performance art was a really deep inspiration for Memory Piece. In particular, the Taiwanese American artist Tae-Shing Hsieh, whose Giselle's work is really modeled on, and he was best known for doing these very rigorous, year-long endurance pieces in the 80s. He lives in a room for an entire year. For an entire year, he punches a time clock every hour on the hour. And one of them, he lives for an entire year tied to another person with a rope. And I think that these pieces are actually very deeply Asian American. I think a lot of Asian Americans are very drawn to this work. I think partly because there's a lot of suffering in it and a lot of rigor. And it also sort of, I don't know, looks at this, the tension between is artwork real work? By just saying well, whether it's artwork or real work, it's just another way of wasting time and passing time. So to answer that, I feel in some ways the book tries to look at that particular Asian representation and then complicate it by just imagining, whenever I think about this artist, I think did Tae-Shing Hsieh have a mom? And I know he did literally have a mom, but I meant the kind of metaphorical mom in our heads, the one that's saying don't do this, or why aren't you getting married and getting a real job? And so my character Giselle ends up living in a mall for a year in her response to figuring out the time, money, rent problem, and she's kind of having to contend with those expectations put on her by her own mom and her own family obligations and the own stereotypes of what it means to be an Asian woman artist. And at the same time, I guess just to finish the Tae-Shing Hsieh story, he had a close friend who was responsible for coming in every day and feeding him a roast beef sandwich and also scooping his poop throughout the year that he lives in a cage. And
I was wondering.
and so that friend is so pivotal, and that friend is Jackie in the novel. And so my response, I think, to this kind of insular Asian artist trope is to both complicate it by, I don't know, adding a sense of depth and realism to the characters' relationships, having them have relationships, and also having the friend who scoops the poop be an important part of the narrative. You need the friend to scoop your poop, and sometimes you have to be that friend as well.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
I think both with my fiction and with my nonfiction. So I write and publish. Have written and published quite a bit of short nonfiction, and that is, it's all, I mean, everything's political, but that's explicitly political and has to do with marginalization of various kinds and injustice, et cetera. But I think I am with my work continuing to work toward trying to be more of my full self and to put more of my full self into the work and to hide less. And yeah, and there are so many other people who are doing this and have been doing it. One of my very first events for exhibit was with the comedian Margaret Cho, who, if y'all have seen her work, you'll know what I mean. I love her so much, and my parents and my whole family were coming to this event because it was in LA, which is where I grew up, and I really didn't want, and I still don't want my parents to read this particular novel exhibit. We'll just all be better off if they walk away from this one. And my whole family filled the front row of that event with Margaret Cho. They're just my aunts, people who've known me since church people who've known me since I was 8. The entire front row was my family, everybody staring at me, and Margaret Cho. And never in my life have I been more grateful for the slight language barrier between my elders. and English, because there were just times when so for instance, Margaret Cho was saying something like, "It is so ridiculous that people think submissive people are weak. You should see me fisting someone and tell me if that's weak." And I helplessly glanced at my father.
No.
And he looked gently confused for a second, and then he nodded approvingly. And I saw immediately that what he thought that Margaret Cho was talking about punching somebody. And my father believed very much that we should all be able to defend ourselves, especially women. He enrolled me in Taekwondo as a kid, and there were just all kinds of things like that, there was a thing about a sling that used in sex, and I was like, they think we're talking about hammocks. Good. So yeah, I'm working toward it, and with an asterisk that I would sometimes like my parents to read a little bit less of what I write.
Did you want to take that one?
Sure,
Oh, you do?
yeah.
Okay.
The question was, if not too personal, can you talk about how or why you lost your faith? And yeah, it was gradual, and then it happened all at once, which is what Hemingway said about bankruptcy. It felt as though there were all these questions and problems that I had that just kept building up, and then one day, it kind of like the door opened, and then the faith was gone. And I think the biggest situation for me, the biggest question that I found to be unresolvable within the context of the kinds of Christianity that I was around, at least, was that there are just so many different kinds of faith, and there are so many different kinds of belief about how the world works, and the kinds of Christianity that I was around. The idea is that there's one true God, and that anybody else who believes anything else is going to hell. And that just became impossible for me. Although I will say that my mother, who's an ardent Catholic, also believes that everyone who's trying to be a decent person is going to heaven, and she believes she knows more than the Pope. Given that the Pope is clearly is that the whole idea of women not being able to be priests is bullshit. She also believes that dogs are probably going to heaven because they're fantastic. So I don't know what my mother's version of Catholicism is, but I'm into it.
We're just about out of time, but I'll just ask you guys briefly if you want to just tell us a little bit about what's next for each of you. You've told us a little, but a little more. Rueful laughter.
Yeah, I'm trying to begin book 3 and get into the place where I can do that. And I don't really know what it's about yet, but so far I think it's a satire about middle-aged friends losing their minds. So pretty timely.
I'm here for it.
And yeah, I've been working for about a year on my on a third novel, and it has to do with art heists, and I've been reading a lot about art theft. And one of my biggest takeaways, to my great astonishment, is outside of the sort of obvious candidates like MoMA, the Met, etc., art is bizarrely easy to steal. Like most museums are. I don't know. I've been telling my partner, listen, if we get dead broke, I have a backup career for us. It seems yeah. So I've been reading a lot about art theft.
Great. Okay. I think that's it for our time. Join me in thanking.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
It was a lot of fun.